hot take. Outer space is incredibly boring.
Can I ask, like, why is it boring?
There's nothing going on in space.
I feel like there's so much going on in
There's a lot
space.
going on there, Chris.
There's a lot going on in space, and none of it is exciting. Like,
To you?
to me.
Okay.
Other people clearly think space is exciting.
I am
like
definitely-
Star Wars alone, and that's not even real
yeah, I was gonna
space.
say,
That's
That's-
also very fake space. Yes, yes.
like I took astronomy 101 twice because I forgot I was taking it the first time because it was so boring.
But like Chris, like it doesn't like blow your mind that like there's a glowing ball of hydrogen like millions of miles away that then warms our planet
Like
and makes us stay alive.
in concept, it does, and like I like looking at the stars like in every other person in the world, but like I don't want to know about like.
If you think outer space is boring, I ask you to stop looking at the stars.
Am I appropriating?
You are
space?
appropriating space.
What up? Welcome back to Three Losers in a Church. Today we're going to be talking about some Bible characters. And my premise was that there are a lot of characters in the Bible that we kind of like latch onto or like relate to or like want to emulate more than others, even though there's countless, well, I'm sure someone's counted, but there's tons of characters in the Bible. But there are always those ones that like stick out and you're like, I'm really fascinated by this person and what they did, that kind of thing. And I think it kind of brings out our own like desires and presuppositions and personality traits. So yeah, just wanted to chat about that. Or it's the kind of person where you're like, so you say like, oh, I like this person. And someone's like, yeah, that sounds about right. Like, I'm not surprised at all. Yeah.
I think that last line is very interesting.
Right.
Yeah, like when we were talking about this before, like we all were like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. I can see that." Yeah. So it's very accurate. I think.
Yeah.
we tried and true to our characters.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can go first if you want.
Yeah.
So the person I chose was Peter, partially because he's just someone I've like read a lot about. Interestingly, the first pope.
Oh, actually?
Yeah, he's called the first pope.
Yeah. The Catholic Church like
yeah.
reveres him as first pope.
Today
a lot
I
of people say
learned.
that he's the disciple that was chosen to like lead the church and kind of do those things. He's also a lot of people believe like the gatekeeper at heaven. Super interesting.
Right, that's like the joke. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
you see Peter at the gates. Mm-hmm.
And so, super interesting character. A lot is revered of him, but usually like post Jesus crucifixion. Like before that, he's kind of just a disciple. You know, he's not really thought of. You know, not the beloved one. He's not, you know, anything like that. But then in Acts and kind of beyond that, he's definitely more revered and you know, appreciated. Personally, I think it's due to a story that we'll get to a little later. But mainly, why I chose Peter is I want to choose kind of two stories to explain why I think he's very fitting for myself and also someone who I think is super relatable and easy to strive to work to. The first one is kind of a weird story, but when Jesus was being arrested, Peter takes a sword and like cuts off the ear of one of the servants of the high priest, and like question of Jesus, like you know, picks the ear back up and like slaps it back on the guy's face. But
I've never heard it being told like that.
That's some good imagery.
yeah. I'm sure it was probably very gentle and caring, but I just like to imagine like Jesus like picks it up and just like
Your ear is back.
it's like wild, like anyways, crazy stuff. But yeah, like in that moment, I find it super like Peter very like this big moment of like you know tearing down like the high priest and like you know he really thinks Jesus is the Messiah in the moment and like that's the action he chooses and that's what he chooses to do in that high stress situation. And I relate a lot with that, but like super weird. Like I think the only time where like there's like some like very explicit violence within like the disciples. Yeah, very like seems like
Yeah.
a very odd story to like put very towards the end before Jesus is captured.
And to just like casually mention.
Yeah.
Like you said in John, it's like a one-line thing.
Yeah,
and
it's like
then
one
You raise your eyebrow, you're just like, oh, that happened.
yeah. It's super, like in some of the other gospels, it's a little more explained, and you know, a lot of times it's not named. John's the only gospel where Peter's named as the person who does it. So there's some debate on whether or not he did it, but I think it's very tried and true to his character. So yeah, just like misplaced emotions a lot of times, and like Peter also often finds himself like Peter's the guy in the Bible who just like asks the really weird questions where you go like, I feel that I would ask that question. Like, it's just no clue what's going on. Right?
He's also the guy that didn't Jesus was like Satan get behind me.
Yeah.
Dude, that's like
right after he said,
like I'll
like you got it right, like I'm the Christ. And then like the next verse is like, get behind me, Satan.
That's
yeah.
that's demoralizing.
Right.
Yeah, Peter's an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
And then the second story, which I personally is probably one of my favorite Bible stories, is Peter's denial. You know, Jesus on the cross, and people keep coming up to Peter, some town folks, and then multiple times. And the last one's like a little girl comes up and asks him, like, "Oh, do you know the man?" And of course, you know, Peter freaks out, like, "I don't know him." He's cursing, yelling, screaming, like causing this big scene on town square. But like everybody knows he knows him, right? I think one of the lines is like, "Oh, your accent gives it away," right? Like we know you're from the area, and so like in that moment, I like it goes back to that idea of like often in these moments of stress and you know not knowing what to do, like misguided emotions. I like relate a lot with that. Like I'm like, oh, something needs to happen, and I just like go about it the wrong way, or I'm like I get angry at the wrong thing, or like I cut the guy's ear off. Not literally, but I think I don't know. But
Do you carry a knife on you?
yeah, I have a sword. You didn't know. But yeah, I don't know. It's like I often find myself in that situation where like emotions are high, and like I just like don't know what to do, and I like feel that I often go the wrong direction. But like the later half of the story of Peter's denial is Jesus is resurrected and he's on the boat. Peter's on the boat, sorry, and Jesus is on shore, and they're fishing, back at their normal life before they were disciples. And Peter looks over, and sees Jesus on the shore, just like cooking some eggs, making some breakfast. And like Peter jumps in the water with his robes and swims over to the shore to meet Jesus. And Jesus tells him he loves him 3 times for the 3 times that he denied him. And like for me, of course, that's the redemption and grace and all that part of the story. But like that's the moment of like regardless of how you respond to your emotions and regardless to how much of a disaster you are and how much you do wrong, like God still loves you and you're still cared for. And that's like hard to hear a lot of the times. And yeah, I just like relate a lot with the idea of messing up.
Yeah,
because I do that quite often. And and like kind of like working through that, and God still loves me regardless of how many times I mess up and how grand my mistakes are. No matter if I cut somebody's ear off.
For me, it's like easy to hear that about somebody else, than to apply it to myself.
Right.
But I did this. Like, yeah, I feel that.
Yeah.
You want to go, sir?
I guess I can. So my name is Samuel. My middle name is Samuel. So Sam is short for Samuel, and coincidentally, there's a guy in the Bible by the name Samuel. So I'm actually named Samuel because of the prophet Samuel. When I was younger as in like when I was in my mom's womb.
That is younger.
I've never heard somebody say that.
I did it.
When I was younger.
I stumbled. I was just like, yikes. Okay. So when they did the scans and everything, the doctors were like, "Oh, there's a chance this kid might not like make it, right?" And my family, of course, they were like horrified because I was their first kid. They really wanted to have a child, and even though all like the odds were stacked against like me coming out, they just kept praying. The church was praying. A lot of people were praying, and then wada bing, wada boom, bada bing, bada boom. I was born, and I came out fine. And my parents were so moved by it, and they named me Samuel because Samuel in Hebrew means God, the Lord has heard. And going back to that, I think as I grew up, my parents would always tell me this. They're like, "Oh, we named you after Samuel, the prophet." And the story that they refer to all the time is when Samuel was 11 years old. He was trained to be a priest and everything, and he was sleeping, just like having a little nappy nap. But he heard someone call out to him, and the initial time he thought it was his the guy who was training him, and he was just like, "Oh, hey, like you called for me," and then the guy was like, "No, I didn't."
No.
And then that happens 3 times. And I'm sure the guy who was training him was just like, "This is getting annoying." And then the 3rd time he said, you know what I think's happening? I think the Lord is calling you. So next time you hear that voice, in response, you should say, "Speak, Lord, for I am listening." And yeah, God essentially calls him on that spot. And I think for me, it's just like thinking like, wow, this 11-year-old kid, the Lord called out to him and chose him to do so many amazing things. It reminds me a lot of just like, oh, how many times in my life have I wandered? Have I looked for? How many times has God called me, and yet I keep mistaking it for something else, or I just ask some poor guy, I was just like, "You called for me," and they're like, "No, I didn't. No, 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 no." And I think it's just beautiful in the sense that, like, I think God calls us to so many different positions, different places in life, and it's just a matter of like, oh, when do we answer the call and say, "Hey, we are actually listening."
Yeah.
Um,
I also think it's
yeah.
cool that like there's a person to lead Samuel
Right.
to like be like, that's God. Like, listen up, buck up.
Right. And I think like throughout my life, it's like, oh, like how many times has God used someone to redirect me back to Him? Right. It's like, oh, I'm trying to speak to you, Sam. I'm trying to like get your attention. But I think that also just kind of illustrates similarly. It's like, like He's searching. He's looking for us. He's waiting for us to call back. Um, Also, to another layer to add to it, Samuel's mother was Hannah, and she was trying to have a kid. But then when she prayed about it as well, she said, "Once I have this child, I would dedicate this child to you, Lord." And bada bing, bada boom, there was a kid, and that was Samuel. And he was dedicated to the Lord. I think my family did a similar situation where they were like, "Oh, we're going to dedicate Sam to God," whatever that means. Does that mean I'm slated for a life of ministry? I hope not. But yeah, I think it's just wild because as we talked about this too, like down the road, this guy Samuel like establishes the monarchy of Israel, which is so crazy to me. I'm just like, whoa, like he's the reason for all these things, or God used him for such greatness. So
Yeah.
I think that's like the one character in the Bible that stands out to me. One, because of my namesake, but two, also it's like, oh, like, am I telling the Lord? Am I saying, hey, like, speak, Lord, for I am listening? And in many cases, I think I'm not.
Right.
Who knows? Maybe there'll be people in my life like you guys or someone out there to redirect me. It's like, oh, maybe the Lord is speaking to you. So yeah, that's my guy.
Cool.
Yeah. Also easy to remember and super lame.
I know, right? It's okay. We all have pretty common names. Mine's literally based off of Christ, so Christopher means bearer of Christ.
Today I learned. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's sick.
Yeah.
What does Tyler mean?
I have no clue.
Tyler. I hardly knew her. Yeah, I picked someone. It's funny you mentioned the monarchy because the first person I picked two people because I can't follow the rules that I set. But I picked Daniel, who comes into play like after the monarchy fell apart.
Right.
That Samuel was,
Established.
Yeah. So because Daniel was a captive once Babylon took over Judah. And like Israel was already gone at that point because of Assyria, and so Daniel was a captive of Babylon, and like I'm actually a little rusty on Daniel. I'm reading it like next week, so I'm hoping to brush up on it. But like he was captive, and he had to like have his name changed and like follow all these new Babylonian rules and dress codes, and like had to learn this new language he didn't understand, which I think is Akkadian.
Do you know what his new name was? I remember they got renamed. Like you said, they got renamed, but
yeah, I remember the other three dudes. I think, but I forget what Daniel's new name was. Wasn't it like Belshazzar or something? Or is that like a World of Warcraft character or something? I could be totally. I don't know.
Maybe it was based on Daniel,
right?
Yeah.
Maybe you just like put an overlay on the video when we look that up.
Oh yes,
make you look stupid. So
The more you.
I'll also put right here, right now, what the name Tyler means.
Right. Oh, yes.
Right.
Audio listeners, we apologize.
But yeah, so he like has to follow all this new stuff, and he's totally complicit with it, and like submits to this new authority, up to the point where he doesn't compromise his faith or like worship somebody other than God. And I admire that a lot, and also struggle with that because like I've always wanted to be the person who's like, I'm not gonna let you tell me what to do, and I'm never gonna like compromise who I am and my individuality and personality. And like God showed me a lot, is continuing to show me that like it's not about me and standing up for myself and my own individuality, and that's really hard for me to admit. I don't know, because like I'm an American living in Massachusetts and like very independent minded, and like so that's tough for me. But he does it. He's like the Babylonians tried to give him this new food, like you were mentioning the Daniel diet,
Right. Yeah.
and he's like, and he politely asks, he's like, would you mind if I don't eat this just for like a week or whatever? Like, could I have my own food? And like, he's very polite about it and doesn't cause a fuss. And like, that's tough for me too, because my instinct is to yell and be like, no. So, but like, I admire that about him too, where he's just like, okay, I understand this is your way of doing things, but like, would you mind if I did it this way? And they're like, yeah, we'll talk to the king.
He also did it, but just to also add on that, like it was also a bit of a statement because he was just like, let's see what happens. Like, here's me on my diet, right? Which was like food. What was it? Vegetable, fruit, and water. And then all these other guys are just gorging on like all these meats and delicious things.
Right.
And then he's just like check us out in a week's time. And then he's just like bang, bang. Like,
it's like a tamer version of like Elijah, where he's like, you call on all your gods and I'll call on mine.
Yeah.
Like,
significantly tamer.
I never realized that parallel though. That's interesting.
I think you just came to it, but yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you brought me to that. Samuel, you brought me.
Full circle.
But yeah, I've always thought, and then like once push comes to shove, he's like, I'm not bowing down to Nebuchadnezzar, you know? And like, and then when he's going to get thrown into the furnace, he's like, God will save me. But like, even if God chooses not to save me, I'm still not going to do what you say. And like, that is awesome.
Oh, he was also the Lion's Den dude too.
Yeah, he had a lot going. Yeah, he had a lot going on.
Good for you, Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel and the Lion's Den. Yeah,
that's a good one. That's a good story too.
Right. Yeah, that's so cool. I've been reading a lot of stories about martyrs lately, and like it's just so inspiring to me that they can just, the Holy Spirit just fills them, and they're like, they can endure it all. Yeah. And then the other person I picked was Paul, because he's another one where he almost followed the rules out of spite. Like he didn't like try to take down Roman authorities and everything. He just kind of he used the fact that he was a Roman citizen to his advantage to try to spread the gospel, where he like appealed directly to Caesar when they were trying to, like, they didn't realize he was a Roman citizen at first, and they're like gonna like execute him and everything, and he's like, I appeal to Caesar, and he's like, oh, I forgot you can do that. So
pulling big brain plays on the government.
Yeah, right. And like everywhere he got shipped to, almost everyone he was talking to, he's just like, here's the gospel, here's Jesus, like. And that was after obviously a life of like persecuting people, which
redemption.
Redemption. It's kind of what you were talking about. Like, no matter how badly you've screwed up, like God's going to use that as your strength point, you know? And that's the other thing is like, I like the idea of following the rules out of spite, where like you could like, I don't know, you do it and then you can call people out when they're trying to call you out and be like, I did what you said. Like, I'm not at fault here. Like, I just did what you told me to, and now you're trying to pin it on me. That's probably my human side coming out.
Very on brand.
But I guess the exercise worked.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess all that to say is like, they're like, not everything in the Bible is meant to be emulated. Like, probably shouldn't be persecuting the Jewish people, or like
chopping off ears for that.
Yeah, cutting off ears, or like, I don't know. I can't actually remember what Samuel did wrong. But.
I'll just say, we were talking about this earlier. Like, I'm sure, I mean, he chose King Saul, and I know King Saul was a bit of a hot mess. And we were talking about, like, God might have scolded him at some point. But, I mean, he also woke up the guy from his sleep 3 times in one night. That's
unforgivable.
Right? That's unforgivable. You can't do that to a man who's trying to sleep.
Right. That in and of itself.
That alone.
Don't
emulate that.
Don't wake me up in my sleep, please.
Right. For real. But like, regardless, like even from the negative things, like we can always learn from these stories and these people, and even the ones you don't think you can learn from. Like, you know, you probably don't think of Judas or whatever, but you know, there's always something to learn. And like, no human is perfect either. So I think that's a healthy reminder of like, no matter what we're going through, what we do, like we're not called to be perfect, which is very relieving, to be honest. Yeah.
Thank God.
Right. Yeah. Thank God, yeah. But yeah, there's always people who like catch our attention, and I think it draws on who we are, and I think that's okay. I think we're unique, and God designed us that way. Like, he didn't make Paul exactly like Daniel, or exactly like Samuel, or David, or Abraham.
Thankfully.
Even though they're all, So, yeah. So, yeah, thanks for listening, guys. We out. I assume you're just going to leave that.
Yeah.
Hey guys, thanks for checking out this episode. Be sure to check out the show notes down in the description. You can check out all our social medias, all the platforms on which we stream, and just hit that like, subscribe button, hit the little notification bell. Help us out, help us with the algorithm that we're constantly fighting against. And thanks for watching. I was gonna dab, I forgot.